Street photographer. What's going on? Oh,
sorry. I just started recording. Yeah.
Oh,
You can have that
got
recording.
it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
got it. That's fine. Okay, so tonight we are very pleased to have with us James Mayer, street photographer, photojournalist, and lifelong New Yorker, who will be leading us into becoming street photographers or becoming better street photographers. Tonight, I'm going to skip the officer reports and other announcements that we usually do at the beginning of a meeting so we can get directly to James's presentation. But first, the one announcement I do have concerns our club picnic. 19 members responded to my email that I sent out asking to let us know what your preference is as to whether we should have the picnic later this month or in the spring. The sentiment was 2-1 in favor of holding the event in the spring. So that is what we will plan for. However, we are not planning on having a meeting in 2 weeks on October 21st, Thursday at our normal night. Instead, Vicki and I are planning 2 outdoor activities on Saturday, October 23rd, weather permitting, related to, first of all, street photography and secondly, fall color. In the responses that we got, there were a number of you that said it would still be great to get outside and be together, even if we weren't going to be doing a picnic. So that is basically what we're going to go ahead and do. Club members should watch for an email from me in the next few days where we'll lay out the details of what's planned. Members of the other Central Illinois clubs will be informed of what we're going to be doing and are going to be welcome to join us. And with that, I turn things over to Vicki, who has been the driving force in putting this special event with James together for us. Vicki?
Okay. I just want to introduce James and talk a little bit about him. I've known him for a little while, and I have been racking my brain trying to figure out for months how I found out about James. I can't remember.
Yeah.
So I know someone told me about him and I checked him out and I looked at his book and fell in love with his work. And I believe when he started the group that I'm in, that I was a member before he even opened it up. So, but anyway, James is a New York photographer based out of Manhattan and Brooklyn. He is a husband, father, and lifelong New Yorker, and has run a photography business since 2005. He sells and licenses prints to companies and businesses of all types and sizes, including G-Star Raw and Tiffany and Company. And you're gonna have to tell me what G-Star Raw is later. He is certified New York tour guide, runs frequent workshops and photo tours, and enjoys documentary projects such as a 7-year project entitled Lex City, which captures the changing spirit of New York in the post 9/11 world, as well as writing about New York and its history. So you and Randy would get along well because Randy's a big history buff.
Oh, yeah.
James is the author of the Essentials of Street Photography ebook and the New York Photographer's Travel Guide, as well as the creator of the Close to Home Photo Salon, which is a worldwide street photography community group, which he began during the pandemic, and which I have nicknamed the CHPS. Not that that's taking off, which I don't understand because I thought it was rather catchy. But anyway, they're not laughing because they know me too well. Tonight, James will be presenting his program entitled An Introduction to Street Photography from Beginner to Advanced Topics. This is the first and basically a 2-part program, and we are talking with James about presenting his program from cities to suburbs, how to do street photography no matter where you are next year. The last thing I want to say is there's going to be a Q&A time with James after the presentation. So if everyone could please just keep your questions or comments until then, that would be great. Okay, James.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'll also I'm going to stop halfway through to do some questions as well. So I'll do halfway through and
Okay.
At the end. If you want to put some, if you think of some during the moment and want to put it in the chat as well, you can put it in. I'll try to, read those as well. So welcome everybody. We're going to talk about kind of the whole gamut of, street photography and how to get involved in it, how to do it. Just to show you before I go, the cameras that I use, and I'm going to mute everybody. And then if you want to, ask a question or say something, just unmute yourself. So I love cameras, the mirrorless cameras. I'm a big Fuji fan, just to show you kind of what I use. This is kind of the smaller camera that I use. I use a 50 or 35 millimeter lens primarily, which I'll talk about. And then for some of my other work, I actually also use a bigger camera. So I'm used to using bigger cameras as well. So I use like a medium format Fuji for a lot of my Brooklyn work. And I'll talk all about that. But I'm no stranger to using smaller cameras and bigger cameras, as well as shooting in kind of quieter areas and busier areas. So let me share my screen real quick. Hang with me 1 second to the PowerPoint. Okay, there we go. I think y'all can see that. Okay. So I'm going to show all this is going to be my work in this presentation. I'm going to talk about some of it. Some of it I'll just show you. I like to start with this one because this one, I'm a big fan of, expressions and looks in the eyes. And really, that's a huge part of, I think, telling a story and sharing emotion in street photographs. And so I just like to start with this one because it's a really good example of that, how, the entire photo is really just the look that she's giving here. And that's the first photo and the cover of my Luck City project, which I'll talk about later. So first, we're going to talk about what is street photography, kind of give you a definition. Street photography is kind of a bit of a clunky term, and I like to think of it more of a sensibility. Everyone, when they hear the word street photography, it kind of quickly gets them to an idea of what it is, but really it's a very, very broad topic that can be done anywhere. There's a lot of different styles to it. So, I like to kind of break out of that mold of, people thinking of, street photography as only being in New York, even though I'm a New Yorker. And that's a lot of what I'm going to show. So street photography is candid photography of life, culture, and human nature. It's a way for us to show our surroundings, how we perceive them, and how we relate to them. And the last part of that is really important because, I think of street photography as kind of like a mixture between documentary photography and a little bit of like kind of poetry almost, and like kind of an art in that way. We're trying to tell, a story of, the surroundings that we see and our surroundings. But there's also a lot of it is personal. We're, as I said, we're filtering what we see to find moments that intrigue us. When you see these photographers who have done this work for a long time, you can really get a sense of their personality. You can kind of get a sense of their ideas. It really kind of shines throughout their work. So it's not just trying to separate yourself from the work. It's actually trying to, tell the story, but really tell your own story as you're relating to your surroundings. And most importantly, it's not just in street or in cities. It can be done anywhere, and people do not have to be present in the photographs for it to be a street photograph. This one's a portrait. I'll talk about portraits, throughout the presentation. Portraits technically, if you talk about the definition of street photography, might not be part of that definition, but it's a huge part of the genre. I do a ton of portraits, street portraits, things like that. And they if you look at a lot of the great street photography books, not all of them, but a lot of them, portraits are a big part of it. And when I do portraits, I always try to capture people in moments where they're kind of lost in thought, where it's a candid moment, for them, even though we're doing a portrait session, so you can see here in this photograph, how that happens. And of course, for portraits, it always helps if the person has the Louis Vuitton logo tattooed on their head. So that's the key to good portraits. I like sequencing in books, and I love putting images together and, and creating stories and stuff. So, some of the images I'm going to put together kind of, fit in a theme. And this, I love the design of these two together. This is a photograph of a bathroom wall in a touristy part of New York in Nolita. And it's really, really fascinating to kind of like read all the, different things that people wrote, kill the rich, eat their young, Cody peed here. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Ethics, laws, and don't be a creep. That's the most important thing. Just when you're traveling, it's always good to like learn about local laws and really kind of, figure out how locals, relate to this type of work. but it is legal in the US and UK for artistic and educational purposes. But it's not legal for commercial and advertising purposes without a model release. And it's, really not possible most of the time to get model releases for these photographs. So, you can use them in any situation that you would use a piece of art. You can put it in a gallery show, you can put it in a photography book, you can use it to advertise that gallery show or photography book because it's a piece of art. You can, illustrate a story with it. If the photograph is, if you're not saying anything that's not true about the person, those are the uses you can do, but you can't use it to sell a product or anything like that. And it's really important to be smart and respectful about who you photograph. It's not always worth it to take someone's photograph. That's how you get in trouble. It's been, the way I shoot and the way I'm going to kind of talk about how I shoot, I really haven't been stopped or had problems in a long time. And it rarely ever happens, but, I haven't been stopped by a person in about 5 years, I think, for taking kind of candid photographs. But that's because I'm kind of smart about who I photograph and I kind of, pick and choose who I photograph. People who are a little bit, who are aggressive or, who aren't as respectful, they get in a lot more trouble. And it's important to know that, this is kind of like it has a creepy element to it. And that's okay. We're not trying to make people uncomfortable. We're doing this because we like people. We like, capturing our surroundings and telling stories of our surroundings. But you really have to have a kind of self-awareness for how you, come off. That's the most important thing. And on that note, one of the things when I work with photographers and I do see some that kind of, I like to, if I see a shot, I'll take it. And, if I see the scene develop, I may hang around and take some more. But you don't have to kind of constantly photograph a person, for a long period of time. That's a situation that makes me really uncomfortable. And I see some people do it sometimes. And that's a situation where you can make the other person very uncomfortable as well. So, think about the other person as well, that you're photographing. Here's a photograph of, a newsstand attendant. And this one, this was in my neighborhood, a place I cross frequently. And I waited for him to look up. He had this great cigarette in his mouth, but he's looking down. So I kind of got in position. I kept the camera up and I waited for that moment where he just looked up before he really noticed me. And so that was the way I got this kind of, facial expression here. Now, these are the major tips. If you kind of get these tips down, you're going to be a really good portion of the way there. So the first one that I love, I got into this type of photography because I really like to walk. It's kind of my way of getting off stress, and, carrying a camera was a natural extension of that. But one of the most important things to do, I think, is to linger and hang out in areas and let the subjects come to you. I do both. I walk around a lot and I stop and I hang out and I just let things happen. And what waiting around lets you do is, it allows people to enter your personal space instead of you entering theirs. So you're already in position, you're already ready with your camera. They notice you less. And it's also, if you're nervous about this type of photography, it's a great way to get comfortable with it because it's harder to kind of get closer to people while you're walking around. And it's much easier to kind of see them and say, kind of get in position so that they kind of intersect with you. On top of that, because you're not walking around, you're paying more attention. You're spending a lot of your mental energy kind of looking around. And this is a type of photography that takes a lot of observation. You really have to develop your observation. And it's very fast. Some of the best moments can be pretty quick paced and happen in an instant. And so the more you're noticing, the better you're going to be at kind of capturing those quick moments. A very simple tip is called the camera snap. And I'll kind of combine this with the acting one at the bottom. When I photograph, one of the most important things is I try to just not look directly at the subjects unless I'm doing a portrait, of course. If someone sees you kind of staring at them, they're obviously going to notice you, even if they're blocks away. So I kind of, I'm a child of ADD, so I'm very good at looking spaced out. I kind of, just make it look like I'm looking at something behind the subject, or I'm kind of lost in my camera. I'm kind of just, I'm a tourist photographing my surroundings. But I don't notice the person that I'm photographing. And so, a lot of times too, I photograph quickly. No one's going to notice, it's just so fast. But when I really want to be candid, I may, aim up at a building first, I'm photographing the building. And once you get that head in the camera, then you can kind of move around and people won't really notice. And then you take the photograph and then I'll kind of pull up and then take the camera away from my eye. The key with the camera snap is to not take your camera away from your eye right after you photograph somebody, because that's the only way they're going to know that you took their photograph. It's super sneaky, but it works well to just not make people uncomfortable. Instead of, I'll take the picture of someone and I'll either move the camera up and away and then I'll take it away, or I'll let them walk through as if they're kind of like in my way and I'm waiting for them to move out of the way. Keeping your camera up is important. It's not always possible because, a lot of people I know have heavier cameras with zoom lenses and things. It's one of the reasons why I love prime lenses and I love mirrorless cameras. But as I said, I do it with larger cameras as well. So a lot of times when I walk around, I'll kind of hold the camera in one hand and I'll kind of keep it up like this. I might prop my arm up like this. And when your camera's up, it's really much easier to take quick shots. So this is a lot easier than kind of taking it from your waist and bringing it up, not just for comfort level, but for quickness. So I'll walk around like this. And, because I have a prime lens, even shooting without looking through the viewfinder, I'm used to the 50 and the 35. So I can really, crop it, frame it exactly how I want. Like just keeping the camera up like right here. So if I really want to be candid, I might take a shot like this or this, but it's also not that hard to kind of go right up to your eye. I say smile here because it's more just kind of try to act like you're comfortable. It's interesting to watch photographers who've done this for a long time, because you can get right up close and like have a great time and you're smiling and people feel like, if you like look like you belong and you're having a good time and you don't think you're doing anything wrong, they'll see you. They're gonna see you no matter what, but they'll just disregard you. If you're sneaking off in the back and you're looking very uncomfortable, they're gonna notice you, and they're gonna feel more comfortable. You can even like watch videos of YouTube of photographers doing this, and there's some photographers on YouTube that don't do it respectfully, and there's some that are. So if you look at some that are kind of a little bit more respectful, that's kind of a better thing to do. When you see it done and you see it done the right way, it's amazing how you can really kind of get in the middle of, all the action and get close to, people and do things the right way. It works really well. Yeah. And the final thing is to walk slow. I can be a fast walker sometimes. I'm certainly a fast talker, as you can tell. It's the Manhattan anxiety. When you're walking fast, you're kind of not noticing things as much. And a lot of times, especially when I teach photographers, it seems like some people are always looking for that next amazing location. They're kind of like always going and looking for that thing to happen and spectacular thing. And those things happen sometimes, but it's not that often. And by doing that, they're missing all of the stuff around them. Like, it's really, I always tell people not to disregard kind of the boring areas or the areas that you think there aren't good photographs, because sometimes you'll take a good photograph in those areas and they'll be just so much more interesting than anything else. It's as Vicky mentioned, I teach this online, photography school kind of, it's called Close to Home. It's based on photographing kind of your surroundings wherever you are, and there are people from all over. And what we're doing now is a challenge where people have to photograph in parking lots or gas stations and take the most interesting photographs they can in those situations. And like the reason it's fast, they're creating some like incredible stuff. It's amazing to see. It's like everyone's just sending it in. I'm like looking through it all. But that's an area where you spend a lot of time. People are in parking lots and gas stations all the time. And who takes photographs there? You just think it's just a pass-through place, something that isn't interesting. But if you really look around and really take your time, you can take some really, really fascinating photographs. So that was a really fun challenge to put to people because it was hard, but the photographs are just like unique. It's not something you see every day. Here's one, a lot of times when I was talking about having the camera up and having it set, and I'm going to teach you some other skills like about, having everything set so you don't really have to kind of worry about setting things. This is a fast moment. Like this guy was walking towards me and then he looked down at the kind of sort of last second. And then I noticed this amazing hat. And because I had my camera up and because I was all ready, I could just quickly take the shot. If I hadn't had things set up, if I had the camera around my waist, there's a much better chance I would have missed the photograph. And there are a lot of photographs in here that are like that. So overcoming fear, that's kind of the big first step. A lot of people, it's daunting at first to do this type of work for some people, not for all. So one thing is if someone stops you and says, "Hey, did you take my photograph?" It's important to know what to say because the more you get comfortable talking to people, the more this genre gets easier. So if someone stops me and says, "Hey, did you take my photograph?" Very honest about it. And I just say, "Oh yeah, I'm a photographer." I try to be enthusiastic. I'm doing a, project on this area and the people in it and the scenes. And I try to, flattery is great. So I'm like, oh, I thought you looked amazing. I just had to kind of take the scene with you in it. Usually, and that's usually like, great, I offer to send them a photograph. They seem uncomfortable. You just, say, hey, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm happy to delete the photograph. Legally, you don't if you're in the US or UK, but, if someone wants you to delete the photograph, it's the kind of nice thing to do. But if it's the best photograph of your life and you think you're faster than the other person, just run away. So that's the other key to this. Although usually if anyone ever stops you, it's usually a terrible photograph. So, and you're embarrassed to kind of show it to them. Street portraits are a really great way to get over the fear because it's just a great way to kind of connect with people. It's especially since the pandemic, it's been even more like it's rare that I get turned down for a portrait, for asking for a portrait. I probably, for every 10 people that I ask if I can take their portrait, it's probably 8 to 9 people say yes. So it really kind of will give you the sense that like you're making people's day, you're kind of flattering them by stopping them, and you can create some great pictures as well. And it's a great way to get comfortable with people around. So I highly suggest, you try some street portraits, and you don't have to find the flashiest people. You don't have to find the people with the red hair and the tattoos and all that. Like, find, your just everyday people who look like, they'll open up to you or something like that, and give it a go. I think you'll create some good photographs that way. As I mentioned, picking a spot and waiting is a really great way to kind of get over the discomfort. It's much easier to kind of get closer, great photographs by standing there and waiting. And repetition is really important. This type of photography is sort of a little bit more like a sport, I think, than a lot of other types. Not all types. There are other types that are kind of like sports as well, but it's very it's fast paced. There's a lot to think about. It's very instinctive. So, a lot of times it's going with your gut and taking a photograph. And so, if in the winter and like February, when I'm just like, screw it, I don't want to go outside. When I start photographing again, it's sometimes I feel a little rusty for a few weeks. So it's important just kind of, go for a walk and, even if like, in the middle of nowhere, just go for a walk, take your camera out and like search for interesting moments, search for unique things. And it's really going to start to pay off and it's going to start to spiral. And the final thing for overcoming fear is, while you can do this with any camera, I've done it for a long time with an SLR and DSLR. I do it with a big camera now a lot of the time. A small camera, a small mirrorless camera and a prime lens is a huge, I think, advantage for many situations. It makes you more conspicuous, but also it's just lighter and easier to use and quicker. And that really helps with the fear, I think. When you have a big camera and you feel like everyone sees you and you can, when you get comfortable and you get good at using it, like you could do that really, really well. But it takes a while to get comfortable like that. With a smaller camera where you're quicker, I think it really helps you get over that initial fear very quickly, or quicker. So there's a lot of great, prime mirrorless camera companies. I'm a huge Fuji fan. Ricoh makes the GR3 is a great camera if you like pretty wide angle lenses. Sony makes good ones as well, although Sony's lenses are larger. So they have some good smaller lenses. So, you got to find the right lens that works for you for that. But I like Fuji because it's a good mix, a good price point, great quality photos, and just the lenses are pretty small. And I'm not paid by Fuji, by the way. Here's a photograph taken with a DSLR and a zoom lens. When I used to use that a little bit more of the time, I would pick a spot and wait more often because, it's harder to use, it's heavier. So it's harder to take photographs a little bit when you're walking around, those quick moving photographs. So I would spend more time waiting and it worked well. Here's another quick shot where the crowded Fifth Avenue street where the crowd parted. And I saw this like amazing, face. This face kind of reminds me of the face in the Mona Lisa with the kind of slight smirk and the kind of powerful look. And because I had my camera in my hand and ready, I was able to take a quick shot and capture it. Now talk about light real quick. I assume because of the type of photography, a photography that y'all do, and I'm assuming light well, so I'm not going to talk about it for too much, but light and street photography is a little bit different than other forms of photography because you're in less control of it. You could be pointing in the perfect light, all set up, it's beautiful. And then the best moment of your life happens behind you, in the shadows. So it's you have to kind of always just have a sense of where the light is, and be ready for things to kind of change. And obviously sometimes the light's just going to screw things up, and you can't get it. But you got to kind of stay on your feet for this. So I always, like, when I walk out the door, I think about how strong is the light, really important of what direction is it coming from? Is it behind the subjects, and they're in the shadows, and kind of creating this really kind of glowing look? Is the sun hitting them directly, and really, showing every pore and detail, and the colors pop and things. How strong is the contrast, and is your main subject in the highlight or shadows? Those are situations where you can kind of technically screw up a photograph when your camera kind of messes up. Is the light making interesting patterns? Can you pick a place with wonderful light and take a photograph? Not the person doesn't have to be in it. It could just be a great photograph on its own, or you could pick a great background like that and wait for something to happen and see if it all comes together. Where's light reflecting? I like to shoot in the wide angle streets of Fifth Avenue and Broadway. If you go in the middle of summer at the right time when the sun's right overhead and you kind of shoot into the sun, the sun really hits the pavement, and it like hits people's faces, and it makes them glow almost. It's like really this opulent look. And so it mixes really well with the very affluent people walking down the street. So I really like that. And night is one of my favorite times to shoot street photography. I do it handheld, ISO 3200 or 6400, which works great on this camera. But what I do is I hop from artificial light source to artificial light source. So, if you don't have the light at night, you just can't photograph, if you don't have a tripod. It's impossible. So what I'll do is I'll just go from storefront window to storefront window, or a lamppost or things like that. And I'll wait there, and I'll just kind of put myself in between the light source and where the subject's coming. And it works really well. It's similar to the lingering and waiting, and everything looks better at night. Yeah, I really like to do that. Here's one where I had to wait for a taxi to come by and illuminate the scene. Otherwise, you couldn't see all the details in there. Now, camera settings real quick. I'll talk about that. I know it's the most fun thing to talk about, but it's important, especially for street photography. You can do this type of photography well with, shutter priority, aperture priority, manual. It all works. There are photographers who do it with all of these and do it really well. I personally prefer aperture priority, or shutter priority is fine too. It's, if the lighting's consistent, sometimes I'll do manual or sometimes at night. But the problem is that, as I mentioned, 1 second you're photographing the sun, the next second, the best moment of your life happens in the shade. Things change constantly, and it's a lot to constantly change your camera settings every time you turn around, and it really slows you down. It really stops your focus. So for me, that's why I don't like to shoot in manual. And I think like aperture priority is pretty much like shooting in manual, because you what shutter, you have an idea of what shutter speed is going to be in the shade, and you have an idea of what shutter speed is going to be in the sun. So you kind of know your settings, but you're letting the camera just do some of the work for you, so you don't have to think about it too much. So I'll first walk out the door and I'll look at my ISO. I'll look at the sun and see how bright the sun is, and I'll set my ISO. And, my general rule in New York, at least with the tall buildings, is I keep it up higher than a lot of people do. If I'm in the bright sun and I'm in the bright sun for a long time, I might keep it at ISO 200 or 400, it's so bright. But typically on a sunny day in New York, I keep my ISO at 800, which seems high. But the reason for that is I always expose for the shady sides or the shady areas of the street. Because if you expose for the shady sides, then both the shady sides and the sunnies are going to be sharp. If you expose and set your camera up for the sunny side, the shady sides will be blurry. So I'm always keeping my ISO up and making sure everything works in the shade, and I know it'll be in the sun. What it means is that your ISO is higher than it normally would be for the sun, if you're just shooting the sun strictly. But these cameras are so good these days that ISO 800, nobody notices at all. You can create great prints, blow them up. They look beautiful. With cameras from 10 years ago, a different story. You had to be a little bit more careful about being lower ISO, but these days it looks great. So yeah, keep set your camera settings up for the shade. Then I personally like to, I love the look of shallow depth of field street photography, and at night, and you have to do it. And, often you don't have a choice. But when I can, I like to have more depth of field. So, typically I start about f8. I don't need too much like f11 or f16 unless I'm like on the beach or something and it's super sunny. But, typically I'm around f8, and then as it gets darker, I go down lower. And the reason I like more depth of field is because of two reasons. One is focusing is tough in street photography. And if you have a shallow depth of field and you miss the focus by a bit, you're going to often screw up the shot. If you have f8 and especially a wide angle lens, you have a decent depth of field. If you miss the focus, you're still going to often get the subjects pretty sharp. So that's one reason. The other reason is there's a lot of scenes like, sometimes, many times you'll just have the subject and just, that's going to be the focus of the image. But there are a ton of scenes where you have a great subject and a great background, or multiple subjects, juxtaposing and bringing things together, and they're at different depths. And with a shallow depth of field, when that happens suddenly, there's not going to be enough focus for a lot of those scenes to be as good as you want. With a decent depth of field, you'll get those shots as well. So these settings are basically meant to, for the situations where when you see the best moment of your life, you're not going to screw it up. And you screw up a lot of best moments of your life in street photography. But because of the settings that I keep, I feel like, I minimize that as much as possible. And the final thing is when you're on aperture priority is to think about your shutter. So, when I set up my ISO and I set my aperture, I look through in the shade and I see, the shady side of the street where it's darkest and I'm most worried. And I just check what shutter speed it's giving me. And I always try to keep it 2/50th of a second or above, or 200 and above. And that's going to freeze the motion in people. At night it's darker and you don't have as much, flexibility. So I'm okay going down to 1/125th or 1/80th. And sometimes they're a little blur and it still works great. But during the day when I have the ability to, I'd rather have a higher ISO and a fast shutter speed to make sure the subjects are sharp. Camera settings are done. Great. Here's a scene where if you take a look, this was kind of a fast, quick moving scene. This guy kind of drove up. I saw the smoke in here. And because I had, a decent depth of field and all my settings set, I was able to capture all of these elements together and get everything sharp. Really, it was seeing the scene and framing it. And that's all I had to worry about. I didn't have to worry about anything else. And of course, this guy, after he saw me take his photograph, he laughed and just said, just please don't show my mom. Which I thought was funny. This Louis Vuitton store, by the way, is one of the best places to shoot in New York. Tourists and people come all over the world and they come to the store to spend like $1,200 on sneakers. And it just brings some kind of you waiting out there. It's just, you see some fascinating scenes, like the guy with the tattooed head and there'll be a few more, I think, from this in this presentation. Here's another one, just a crowded scene on Canal Street. And because I had a wide angle lens and because I had a decent depth of field, I was able to get all of the elements in this frame sharp. And, they're all really important to this image, all the little great colors and the details. If I had a shallow depth of field, this image would not have worked. Now, the most important question of the whole day is what makes an interesting photograph? So very important to pay attention. I have no idea. I say that kind of joking, but it's an important thing. When you start to figure out what you find interesting and what's interesting in your work and what you relate to, that's when you get on the path towards becoming a good street photographer. At first you start and you're just trying to get comfortable with it and you're just trying to capture interesting things that you see. Oh, after a while, you start to kind of notice, similar themes, or ideas in your work, and you start to put them together. And then you start to think like, oh, I really like photographing this type of stuff. I really like my work to look like this. And then you start to notice it more when you're shooting. And so that's figuring out what's interesting is kind of a personal thing. And it's both done while you're shooting, but also while you're editing. I love to edit and I love to, use collections in Lightroom and bring my ideas together and bring my similar photos together. And it really educates me for what I'm trying to do when I'm shooting. And it kind of helps me figure that out. And then on top of that, for helping you figure out what you find interesting, I think like photography books and looking at the work of other photographers is incredibly important. The photography books are something that I love. I love, to read them and look at, work from photographers in completely different areas and use that to kind of, stimulate me. And it really opens your eyes to what can be done. And you see images that you really relate to, and you kind of create this mental Rolodex. And it starts to help you figure out what you find interesting. I think it's just a vital part of the whole process. Here's a photograph. If you're familiar with, Robert Frank's The Americans, he really photographed a lot of objects of Americana. The jukebox was one of them. The jukebox is a recurring theme in his work, the American flag. In a somewhat similar vein, when I'm photographing, it's, the things that I often look for, especially for my Lux City project, not for, all different types of things I work on, but, it's like almost the suit of armor that people wear when they're walking around. So you get, the lost in the headphones, the coffee cup, lost in their phones, the shopping bag, the clothing. That's all kind of this like suit of armor that people wear. And there's a lot of disconnection, which I'll talk about in a little bit for the project the Lux City project. But this, for like the image like this, kind of pulls that all together for me, and especially with the kind of facial expression here. Here's a photo that of the big headphones everyone wears around the city, and the reason why this is part of the Lux City project. But the reason why I wanted to take this photograph was because when people talk about like the energy of New York, the specialness of New York, in my opinion, what that is when you walk outside, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who you're going to come across. You don't know what experience you're going to have. Part of the amazingness is just, having those experiences by walking around. And it's part of why I like to walk around and photograph. And like in the last 10 years, 15 years, you've just seen more and more people just wear headphones, and they're completely disconnected from the city. It's like they walk out of where they're going, they put on their headphones and they get to the place, and they don't look around or do anything like that. And they're completely disconnecting themselves from like what makes this place interesting and special. And so, not that I don't wear headphones sometimes when I'm walking around, but it's you can see you can see kind of the culture changing a little bit, and headphones are a part of that. They're a big part of that, actually. So that's what this photograph, means to me. And that's why I took it and show it. Now, well, I said I have no idea what makes a photograph interesting. Actually, there are things that can help you kind of get to that point. So the first is content and story. It can be a literal story. It can be, a story you try to tell. It can be, trying to tell a story of your area. Or it can be, something a little bit more abstract. It can be a feeling. It can be an idea. It could be something that just brings out thoughts in the viewer. Emotion and gesture is really important. As I mentioned, one of the things when I'm walking around, the thing that I'm looking at most, there are those moments that are spectacular and they happen and they're random and you don't know what it's going to be and you don't know what's going to happen. But when I'm walking around, the thing I'm looking for the most is I'm looking at people's eyes and facial expressions, and I'm looking for people who kind of wear those emotions on their sleeves, because those really can bring feeling into an image and create some really fascinating photographs. So that's something that I suggest you kind of keep an eye out for. I'd rather the most nondescript, like everyday person with a really great expression and emotion on their face than the flashiest person just walking down the street with nothing going on, on their face. Form, light, color, tone, composition is really important, especially when you can bring them all together in an image. Looking beneath the surface, images that some of the best images I think are the ones that make a viewer think and maybe aren't so clear as to their what they're trying to say. Like they're clear enough to kind of set a little, get you thinking, but they don't tell you the whole story. So something that like looks beneath the surface and stimulates your thought. Consistency, and I think consistency, what I mean by this is like consistency in a project of work or a body of work. So consistency and idea, just like you can look at some photographers and you can see their thought process in their work. And even if the work looks completely different, even if it's, one book is in color and one book's in black and white, like a Martin Parr, you can tell Martin Parr no matter what he's shooting. Trent Park's another one who shoots. Trent Park is a photographer who does these great color books and these great black and white books, and they have different meanings, but you can kind of tell, when you're looking at a Trent Park image. And as I mentioned, interpretation and ambiguity, not doing all of the work for the viewer. Here's a photograph. If you can guess how many devices are in this photograph, I'll give you a prize. I don't know what that prize is, but you can put it in the chat and we'll see how close you get. If you can think, I'll let you one more second. Don't screenshot this. Now, imperfection. I talk, imperfection is really important for street photography, and it's something that for some photographers, depending on what genre you come from or what you started with, it's harder for some than for others. Especially like landscapes where you're trying to get everything perfect and all the details, and you have all this time. Street photography really celebrates the idea of imperfection. For others, some street photographers, their work is really like formed and perfect, and for others, it's the opposite, and for many, it's in between. But I'll read this real quick. A street photograph does not have to be perfect to be good. The nature of a good street photograph gives us a glimpse into a slice of reality, and perfection can often ruin this feeling of realness because life isn't perfect. This is why grain, angled horizons, cut off people, or slight out of focus or motion blur are all very common in street photography. Sometimes and often these imperfections are going to ruin the photograph, but other times they'll make it that much better. And when I'm looking at photographers' work, when I'm doing reviews, when they show me things, I hear a decent amount where, someone will say they'll show me like a really interesting photograph and they'll say, I just wish I hadn't cut off this guy's foot, or I wish I hadn't, and it's like the photograph's so interesting. I didn't even notice that, it didn't even like come into my radar. And it's, they're coming to it from this side of perfection where everything has to be right. But like often, the things that screw up a photograph in street photography, it can often make it feel better because it makes it feel like a more special moment. It makes it feel like this is something that you were lucky to get. I don't care that there's a hand in the way, or I don't care that there's a cut off foot. Like you got this great moment. So give yourself a little flexibility and try to look at the photographs and figure out which imperfections are going to screw up the photograph and which are not going to screw it up and which are going to actually make it even better. Give yourself a little bit more leeway than you normally would with maybe some other genres. If you look at like Gary Winogrand's work, so much of his work is tilted, it has that kind of angle. And that angle adds energy to the photograph. It creates these diagonals. It allows you to kind of see a little bit more of kind of the upper and lower portions. But yeah, the most important thing is it just makes it feel unplanned and it makes it feel real. So that's one reason why I love looking at photographers who do this kind of tilted stuff. Daido Moriyama is a photographer, the most famous Japanese street photographer, who does a lot of stuff with imperfection. His work is has this feeling of realness and imperfection, and there's a lot of angled shots, a lot of grain, all that type of stuff. He purposely does. Here's a photograph of someone taking a butt selfie. So you walk around enough, you kind of see it all. You look at this is a crop from a larger picture. You can see the grain in here. The highlights are kind of a little blown out, which I could have brought back in, but I didn't want to. It just feels like it still looks good. The photograph looks good. It's an interesting photograph, at least to me. It feels like a hot street. It feels real. I didn't want to try to make it more even or anything like that. I just wanted to look like it looked. Here's another one of a hairdresser. This was, I didn't fully stop myself. It was kind of in the evening and the shutter speed was a little slow, and it was kind of just a happy accident, where there's a little blur here. And it really, I think it adds to the photograph. It makes it kind of look painterly. It kind of makes the cigarette look almost like it's floating and kind of leads you into this, kind of powerful expression. So this is one where the mistake kind of, mistakes are rampant in street photography. It's just so spontaneous. So the great mistakes are a wonderful thing. Combining elements. I say this because some photographers, they have a little bit of like a tunnel vision, which is great in some ways. And some photographers see a little bit, wide and see a lot of things. And if you're one of the photographers who kind of is picking out individual subjects all the time and separating them, those are great for a lot of photographs, but, try to widen your view a little bit, and try to combine elements a little bit more. If you're the opposite, if you only see wide, I'm more of a wide and combine it all. And I have to try to remind myself to kind of sometimes just get in and focus in on a subject. But yeah, you see a great subject, take the photograph, of course, you don't know when it's going to disappear, but also stop yourself for a second and look around, look at the background and think, can I add something in? Is there something else coming? Is there something else happening that I can add in to make the photograph better? When it works, it's really going to work. Here's one. This is actually a portrait, even though it looks kind of candid. And so, I stopped this young woman because I love the cigarette and I love the cross and the full notebook and just seemed really like a really interesting person. And so I asked if I could take her picture. And so I was taking a few and it was okay. She wasn't the most comfortable. So I stopped for a second just to get her comfortable. And I said, hang out for a second. I'm just going to I always want to check my camera to see how they're looking. And when I did that and she didn't think I was photographing, she kind of did this great lean, took a drag of her cigarette, got lost in her world, wasn't worried about the photograph. And then at the same time, I noticed this other young woman walking with, 2 trays of coffee cups. And I'm a sucker for a photograph with lots of coffee cups in them. So, I combined it all together and I thought it worked out. This was kind of better than I thought when I stopped her of what was possible. When I do workshops, group workshops, one of the things that, I do is I say, anyone, who can capture a picture with the most coffee cups over the course of the weekend gets a prize. If you haven't noticed yet, there's no prizes. I say a prize just to get people, but it's someone one time, literally 5 minutes after we left the door, caught someone with I think it was like 8 or 9 coffee cups, and that's been the record. I think there's probably 7 coffee cups in this. You can't really see, but I think there's about 7 in this. Here's an old one from Occupy Wall Street, where each individual aspect I think would make for a good photograph, but combining them together really kind of made it that much better. Here's one of a construction site with a truck out front with great graphic and the graffiti, and I waited for a while to get the right taxis and the right ads in the scene just to kind of fill it up. So that I think these little bottom elements I think really added to the scene. Setting a stage. So that's another thing where you pick a location and you find a great background and you wait for a subject to come into the scene. And I'll show you a couple photographs that I think do this well, but it's a really important thing to talk about because you can do this really well, but some people overdo it. They see a great stage, they see a great background, and they think I need a person in that photograph for it to be a street photograph. And so you see all these photographs that are like great background. That's just like a wonderful background. And there's a random person walking through. And that person, like often for me, ruins the photograph, like, because they have nothing to do. They're just walking through. They're just not like an element that like, I think adds to the scene. And you could tell the person like waited for that one person to walk through. And it's just show me that background. It's a great background. Like backgrounds are a big part of street photography. They're half of street photography. People are half, backgrounds are half. Show me that background. If you're going to have a person come into the scene and be a part of it, they need to add to the photograph. They need to add to that and improve that background. So sometimes it's great to have a person in it. Other times, really just don't try too hard to make it. A person doesn't need to be in it to be a street photograph. So here's one where, boyfriend was chasing the girlfriend and, I had this, great background. It just happened to work out really well. Here's another one where I was kind of, waiting for kind of cars to come and trying to get people over this white background here to combine all these elements together. Here's one where, I've been trying to get a non-cheesy photograph of the steam in New York for like a long time, for years. I love bike messengers. It's like the most dangerous job. They're like kind of the superheroes on the street of New York. And so I've been trying to get like a decent photograph of them for years. And finally, after looking and looking and looking, it all came together, in one photograph. And after this photograph, I've never, ever had to photograph steam or bike messengers ever again. I got the photograph out of my system. Here's a scene where, just to show you, this is my favorite corner in the city, Prince of Broadway in Soho. And I came here one day early in the morning. I wanted to get some like good light and I wanted to capture, I wasn't actually thinking of capturing people that morning. I was thinking of capturing some of the backgrounds of that people. So this is what I had in mind, stuff like this. At first, so I started, I took this photograph and just a little interesting tidbit. This is the Prada store on the corner. And this store actually historically loses money each year. It's which I find fascinating, but it's, I guess, an advertisement. So that's why they're there. But after I did this like really interesting looking guy came and like sat down, and because I was hanging out there already and I was kind of photographing in different directions, and like he really didn't pay me like 2 cents of attention. He really was kind of doing his own thing. So it allowed me to hang out and take a bunch of photographs over time. And I wanted kind of like a busy photograph here, to try to get a lot of really interesting elements in the scene. But it didn't quite work out as the purpose of this is to think about which photograph of these four do you like the most. And so this is one that when things started happening, it got a little busier. I was like, trying to get something like this, and I don't think it flows as well as it should have. If it flowed well, it would have been good, but I don't think it was quite there. So I love the first one and the third one equally. I like this one a lot where he's sitting here, but I don't like this one more than the shot without the people. So the different purposes depends on the situation where I want to use them, which one might work better. Color black and white, which is an interesting thing to think about. Of course, it's personal preference. A lot of people start, they think about street photography and they think, oh, because of what they've seen, they think of street photography in black and white. A lot of modern street photography, is done. I would say probably a majority of modern street photography now is done in color. From when you're talking about like the really, really great street photographers. It's still pretty close to, I'd say even, but I'd say it's probably a little bit in the majority of color these days. But you can do both. I think consistency is really important within projects. For the most part, there are some that use black and white and color and put them together, but for ideas and projects, I think it's good to stick to black and white or stick to color, and then you can have one project in color and one black and white. My Lux City project is in black and white. My Brooklyn project is in color. A few projects I do are in color. But I think it's good to keep consistency for the ideas that you're shooting. Black and white has a timeless quality to it. As we mentioned, it's kind of what you think about when you think about the, historical street photographers. Whereas color has a little bit more of a modern feel to it. But I also think you can kind of flip this around. So my Lux City project is about the modern city. It's about, it's about the luxury, the changes in New York, kind of the effects that is happening. I'll talk about the ideas behind it a little bit later, but because of the modern feel, I thought actually putting in black and white would, not only enhance the luxury look, but I thought it would, take it and make it feel a little less modern almost. On one hand, it feels luxury and it feels modern because of the look. On the other hand, it has that historic feeling because it's in black and white. And so it kind of takes you out of this thing of like, no, maybe even though this is of the now, this is just a period in time. This is like a weird thing that's happening. This is not like how things should be or anything like that. Similarly, color, especially these days, like on the Fuji cameras, they have great color profiles that mimic some of their old film. So color can really feel timeless as well these days, a lot more than it could previously. I think with digital. Faces often look really good in black and white. So a lot of times when I have a good photograph with a great face, I'll go to black and white. Not always, but a lot. And of course, the shots with color distractions, you can just fix that by turning it into black and white. Here's one where these two people parted, and I saw this this woman walking by, and I really found it interesting, kind of the flowing red dress here, the relaxed look, and then contrast that with like the muted colors and tones and just the tenseness here. When I talk about the New York anxiety that I have, I kind of connecting to people that have similar things that I feel. Some of these photographs, I'm not trying to say anything bad about them. I'm just trying to say this is kind of what we're feeling and what the city brings out in us. Here's a photograph where, obviously the face in black and white just kind of pops in the eyes, but I waited this on the kind of famous Rucker Park basketball courts in Upper New York. And I waited for a moment where he just like looked up and looked right at the camera to take it. And I think that made the photograph. I don't think it would have worked without that. Here's a one where, just the colors kind of bring out everything. And another one you can see, I love the colors in here, but, really just the facial expression pops here. Now this one I love in color, but excuse me. This one fits in the Lux City project, which is black and white. So I have to put in black and white for that. And it works looks good in that, but obviously I would prefer to show it in color when possible. And the final, like after this part, we'll take a little question break. Talking about street photography without people. It's really, really important to do that. There are a lot of photographers that the only work they show has people in it. And it's like, it's great. Maybe that work is great, but it's like, show me something without a person, show me a detail, show me, there's a lot of shots out there that you can show that, you're really cutting off half of what you can photograph and half of the ideas that you can show if you only photograph people. So here's a few examples to show. This one just for me kind of creates that domineering effect that you can feel in the city. That when I'm feeling that, this photograph shows that. Similarly, the scaffolding and the lines, kind of this almost has like a jailish feel to me here. If you can't tell that both my parents are psychiatrists yet, yeah, it should start coming, through. This is a photograph of Hudson Yards. And this one was one where I actually like, a lot of times I have ideas in my head and sometimes they happen randomly, sometimes they don't, sometimes I get them. This one I thought I want to get a photograph like this. I went and I managed to find something that was exactly what I was trying to create. Hudson Yards, for those that you don't know, is this, it's this horrible, soulless luxury neighborhood that was created over a train yard on the west side of New York. And it's everything that's wrong with New York. They even stole a lot of public funds that were designated for Harlem by doing some financial jujitsu, to get some more funding. And it's, those feelings that I have for this place, I tried to show in this photograph. This is the top of the line buildings, top of the line architecture, sleek, modern, but really it's like an incredibly boring photograph. It's a photograph of nothing. Like this might, just glass reflecting nothing. It might as well be a photograph of a blank piece of paper. So that's when I see this photograph, I think boring, even though it's on the surface, it's pretty sleek and fascinating also. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was trying to show with this. Here's a photograph of the side of the Harry Winston store on Fifth Avenue. And I found this interesting because, when you think about New York, and it's still, there's still so much fascinating to the city. This is just, a lot of this work is just a certain portion of how things are changing. It's not, I do other projects that show the complete opposite of it, but this is one part of what I'm trying to show. But historically, New York has been thought of as, this very unique place, this, place where you can come to be yourself, be different, things like that. But, increasingly a portion of the city is becoming a lot more formulaic. The people, the businesses, it's, you have people coming here who are, moving to New York with an idea of what New York already is, and they're fitting into that mold and instead of creating their own mold. And when I saw all these cities next to each other, kind of, gave me that feeling because, you see it in the same vein as all these cities, and all these cities are starting to look a little bit alike and act a little bit alike. This is a photograph of anxiety for me, or how to deal with it. So yeah, we can take a little, let me just stop sharing. So if anybody has any questions at all, just you can unmute yourself and feel free to ask, and we'll do some at the end also. If not, we can keep going, but anybody have anything they want to talk about? Give 10 more seconds.
Hey, Springfield. My husband walked through.
What do you do when somebody comes up, you've taken a picture of them and they ask you to send them a copy of the digital?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's awesome when they do that. I'll send them, I'll definitely send them the photograph. Yeah, I like doing that. There's one photograph, I don't know if it's in this presentation, and maybe I'll let you know if it is, but that I took on the streets, and yeah, it was happened really quick. The people passed by, I put it on my website, and the person's mother found it and sent me an email and said, I love this photograph. I got the email first. I was like, Okay, hopefully they like it. But yeah, she was like, yeah, and she was like, can I have a print? So I sent a print, and that was like an awesome thing. Yeah, so I love, I'll send them the image digitally. If they want a print of it, I'll send them a print of it too. Um, but it's interesting. Whenever someone asks for like a photograph, I'll give them my card instead of taking their information, because it's you email, like I find that like, when I email people, probably 30% will like respond. And so when I give them some of my card, if they really want that photograph, they can contact me and I'll give it to them. It makes things a little bit easier than having to email everybody and then having a bunch not respond. Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question about the photograph you had of the woman. She was carrying a white paper bag. It looked like it was shot from waist level. Were you,
Yes.
were you shooting that from waist level?
That I was, yeah. So sometimes I shoot from waist level. Usually I don't. Usually it's from here. That day I happened to have like a larger camera and it was a little heavier, so it was harder to keep it up. And so yeah, I saw that moment quickly, and really, if I had taken the camera in my eye, it kind of would have ruined the moment. So I kind of shot it from down here and managed to get it. I had to crop it a bit to get it right. But yeah, that one was definitely, when you talk about shooting from the hip, that was literally probably shooting from the hip. But it's not something that I do that frequently. Yeah.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah.
There's no problem with taking pictures of children, because I noticed you'd had that one of that one little boy. I mean,
Yeah.
are you queasy about that all of a sudden being really accosted if mom sees you?
So it's interesting. Yeah. So things have changed. Yeah, since I took that photo. That photograph was taken in 2004. So I do, if the photograph is amazing, I will take the photograph, but it has to be the right situation. Like, sometimes I'll take candid photographs if I think it's like really respectful and a good photograph. But a lot of times I'll just be very obvious about it. And that photograph of that kid doing the push-ups, I was shooting the whole event. I was very obvious about everything I was taking. So more often than not, if I'm going to take a photograph of a kid, I'm going to be kind of very obvious about it in the right situation and smile. And, if I see the parent say, oh my God, I got a great photograph. But the fast moving streets of New York and the fast moving things, you take a lot of quick photographs, instinctive and stuff like that. And then there are some that just, I'll take, and they're, I think, respectful photographs and stuff like that. But I use a lot of restraint and with that, it's something you got to be careful of for sure.
Is that the same way?
What's up?
Is that the same way that you would handle a picture of a homeless person in New York?
Yes. So, homeless people, I have a few photographs with the backs turned or something like that, where it's not, not showing that, them, or like the photograph that I showed you of like the, you couldn't see the person. It was like in the bus station where you saw the stuff. Yeah, it's, if I'm usually like, if I'm going to like photograph a homeless person, like, especially these days, it's, I'm going to talk to them and do a portrait and try to get to know them a little bit. There's this project I've been doing at a Speedway gas station. And I've been just photographing this gas station, all the people by it, and kind of hanging out there and stuff. And it's a block away from my house. And there's this homeless guy who sits there too. And he does art and he feeds the pigeons. And so we've become friends. His nickname is Mango. And he's a really, really great guy. And so this gas station project has also turned into a project capturing Mango. And every time I like go there, I learn more about him. We talk more, and I take pictures of his art, and he says, put this in the book. It'll be awesome. Yeah, so now I actually commissioned him to paint a picture of the Speedway gas station, which I haven't got yet, but I'll planning to put as the last picture in the book. So yeah, it's I think for homeless people, it's a good idea to try to get to know them or try to talk to them or something like that if you want to photograph them. Yeah.
Okay, it's Vicky. So I knew about Mango, but
Yeah, no, I know. I was telling everybody.
Yeah. Maybe you could explain why Mango is homeless.
Oh, so yeah. So across the street from this gas station is a Best Western Glow Hotel, which for the last couple of years has been used to house homeless people. a lot of hotels, they got money from the government, and they make more money doing that than staying as a hotel. So, but he had recently, when I started meeting, at the beginning, he was actually at the very beginning, I think he was living there. And then very soon after I like met him, they had transitioned back to a hotel, and he had been kicked out. And so, yeah, currently he went from having a place to not having a place, and trying to figure out how to, get a place and stuff like that. And yeah, so it's a tough story as well, but he's this really happy, he's a very like kind of uplifting, jovial person. And he, would openly talk about how he comes to the gas station and it's therapy to feed the pigeons and to paint and all that. And so it's kind of like a really like interesting story about, his personality and dealing with all this stuff. Anybody else have any questions?
Mine's just an observation.
Hmm?
Since I've been trying, I like street photography. And yes, what you were saying, getting the comfortableness, I can feel, but like when I go up to Chicago to see my son and I'm walking around the city, I feel so much more comfortable up in Chicago than I do down here.
Yeah.
The whole demographics is totally different, and people don't seem to notice you as much in the big city as they do here. Here is just kind of like, there's not as many people on the streets.
And that's a really great, and that's actually a big portion of the other presentation that with the doing it in suburbs and areas like that. Like where I live right now, I live kind of a little further out, and so I actually a lot of times I photograph in quieter areas like that where you don't see people for a while. It's interesting. So you have to kind of adapt. Sometimes it's really hard to do. I do, in these situations, I do a lot more portraits than I do candid shots. And I actually, that's a big reason why I use this bigger camera. So this is a medium format Fuji, and I use a 50mm most of the time, although sometimes I use an 85mm portrait lens as well. And it's interesting, when I started to transition from photographing the big city where I was comfortable and anonymous and a small camera is great, it felt sneakier to me. For a lot of people, a smaller camera in those situations might be better, but for me, it felt a little like the way I shot there, I had to transition to a different way of shooting for the kind of quieter areas. And so I chose a bigger camera because I wanted to be obvious. I wanted to announce myself as a photographer. I think that actually got me a little bit more respect. And I still take some candid shots when I can, like I still take those, but I take a lot more portraits. And so I stop people and I talk to them and I tell them what I'm doing. And so the street photography in these areas turns into, whereas my other projects, it's a lot more candids and some portraits. This is a lot of portraits with some candids and a lot of environmentals. And I also use this camera because it's in color and a lot of backgrounds and a lot of environmental shots. And the camera really shows the colors in that extremely well. And so I really wanted that aspect as well. But it's harder. It's definitely harder. And you have to adapt to it. But I think starting with trying to get portraits is an important way. And when you do the portraits of people, it might be an area where people are pretty paranoid, or they're not used to this stuff. And so you can develop a way of talking to people and figuring out how to talk to them where you can kind of explain what you're doing. And I think it's possible to really, even paranoid people, to kind of get them to understand what you're doing. So it takes a little practice. These days, most people, when I talk to them, will say yes. I mean, at the Speedway gas station, when I take portraits, like I think probably 90 to 95% of people say yes. And they're like in their busy day, not expecting to have someone ask for their picture. And I say something like, oh, hey, like I say, hey, I'm a photographer, I'm doing a project on this area. Please don't mind me. I was just wondering, you seem really interesting. If I could just do a portrait of you real quick. And talking to people like that, it works a lot. And also just even asking them a question, asking them, how long have you been here? Opening something like that can help you connect with them as well. So I think that's important, but it's tough. Yeah. I don't know if that helped at all. Yeah.
So I have one more question. Do you find it that people in poorer neighborhoods or the more affluent neighborhoods are more open to having their picture taken?
Uh, uh, I would say poor neighborhoods, for people who live there. In more affluent neighborhoods, you do get kind of like people who are used to cameras. So then, it sort of evens out. I do find that, well, I find in like just neighborhoody places, a lot of people say yes, even if you don't think so. Yeah. It's like, the more I've been doing it here, like it's typically when I think someone's going to say no, they actually say yes. And when I think someone's going to say yes, they say no.
That sounds right.
Yeah. Any last questions? All right, so let's go back to the presentation. Hang on me one sec. Excuse me. So this, use your eyes instead of the viewfinder. All the work is done with your eyes, so train your eyes. And I mean this in like, when I see some photographers photographing, they kind of get their head stuck in the camera sometimes. They're like looking around like this. Like you want to see the moment with your eyes happening. You want to notice people with your eyes. The quicker you are, it's almost like, the first day, it would be a good idea to, like, no one's ever gonna do this, but like to go out and like pretend you're photographing, but like forget the camera and just look around and think about what you'd shoot. And that practice is going to make you kind of see the scenes with your eyes instead of through your camera. And it makes you a lot quicker. So yeah, it's important to just kind of make sure to try to see it with your eyes before you photograph. Now, zone focusing, it's an interesting practice, which I want to just briefly talk about. I zone focus when I'm on 35 millimeters. I don't zone focus with 50 millimeters that often. Zone focusing is much easier, really, with the wider angle lenses that you have. So 35 or 28 works really well. What zone focusing is it's pre-focusing your camera to a certain distance. Typically for me, it's between 8 and 10 feet. And then turning your camera to manual, keeping your camera in manual focus, so you have no autofocus. And if you think about it, if you're, say, 35 millimeter lens, focused around 9 feet away, and you're at f8, everything from like 5 feet to 15 feet is going to be pretty in focus. And the closer you get to 9 feet, the sharper the photograph's going to get. And 5 to 15 feet is where you're photographing street photography mostly. Yeah. So you don't have to focus anymore. You don't have to lock in the focus at all. And so what it does is it makes you that much faster, and you get a lot sharper shots because you're not missing that focus. You have that range of focus. It's already set. And you can get good, and you can zone focus at f2.8 with shallow depth of field and stuff like that, if you really kind of know what you're doing. But, it works best when you can be at like an f8 with a wide angle lens. And I'll show you, a few examples of shots that I was able to get by zone focusing that I would never have been able to get if I wasn't. So here's one where, two people bumped into each other right in front of me. This is on my favorite corner, as I mentioned, Prince and Broadway in Soho. And, I just instinctively, I had the camera set, pre-focused. And if you think about, if I had been autofocusing, I would have back focused the shot and ruined it. Or I would have locked onto one of them, and by the time I had focused and recomposed, the moment would have been gone. Or I would have locked onto them and shot the photograph, and the composition would have been completely off. The only way that I would have been able to get this photograph was because I was zone focusing. Here's another one. I've been trying to get like good crowd photographs in Canal Street for a long time, and I showed you one before, and this is the other one. This is my favorite one. I've taken so many, and I have like 2 that I like. This is one that I like. And so the way that I got this was I pre-focused. I autofocused on the ground here, and I turned the camera to manual focus, and this is where everyone's crossing. And that way, when the camera was all set, all I had to do is hold it up and just look around for the people and wait for them to walk. And so since I was watching the people, coming, I could really, the second that they all crisscrossed, I was able to take the shot and capture it. And even with that, it was very hard to do this. I missed a lot, or a lot weren't perfect. And finally, I was able to get this. How will an image age? I think it's just an important thing to keep in the back of your head. Think about that, to not take things for granted because they're now or they're modern. Like what can you take now that's going to be interesting in 10 years? Or what are you disregarding now and not photographing because it seems normal, but like in 5 or 10 years, you're gonna be like, I wish I had taken that photograph. What's gonna disappear? What's gonna, it's really important to think about that type of stuff because, especially as society kind of changes quicker because of the internet and everything that's going on. I think you're a little bit more aware of things that disappear suddenly. Yeah, so keep that in mind. Now, talking about like cliche images, I don't really like that word, but everyone kind of gets when you say it. Like images of people staring at their cell phones. It's something that you can take anywhere. You see it all the time. I find it fascinating to take photographs of, but the thing is that because it's everywhere and because it's so easy to get, to get a good photograph, to get a photograph that works, it has to like be a really good photograph. It has to like raise the bar. So yeah, and that's where kind of the to get around the idea of a cliche image, you have to make it a really good image for it to work. So that I have I take a lot of photographs of people on their phones, and I have a few that I like. This is one that I really like, and then the rest I just don't show. Here's one part of the Lux City project. Someone else's graffiti that says "Uber me peace," but I thought the message was really important for it, so that's why I included it. The idea of the Lux City project is it's as Vicky mentioned in the introduction, it's about the changing nature of New York since 9/11. You're having a lot of people moving here, from other places who see this idea of New York, of what it is, and come here and try to make that try to fit into that idea instead of standing out. As Penny Arcade said, New York is now the place where New York used to be the place where all the outcasts and the people that didn't fit in moved to, and now it's the place where the 10 most popular kids from each high school moved to. So you're seeing like there's a lot of issues of like conformity, consumerism, luxurification, and within that there's this really interesting like you can see this disconnection, this type of anxiety that's a little bit different than the anxiety that you used to see. And so like the idea of Lux City is really trying to kind of explore that whole idea and try to try to show what it feels like to be in the city during that. So themes and projects, transitioning into this, once you get, at first you start and you just try to get these like, good images and you try to get better as a street photographer. And then some people, not all, some just, create great work and they don't have these themes and projects, and others decide to go in that direction. And it's a really fun direction to go into if you decide to do it. And there are ways to, you think of an idea and then you go shoot it. Like the Lux City project, really came out organically. I shot it over a 7-year period or an 8-year period. And at first I, had a feeling of what I was shooting and I was shooting it. And, I was doing this as I was kind of really reading about the changes in the city and really reading about the stuff. And it was a, just a topic that I was fascinated about. And so as I started educating myself on this, as I started to put words to the project, it really started to spiral and form. And halfway through, I really kind of started to have a set of images that I liked. And then I started to have a focus, and I got more and more images per year, each year, because I started to get more focused and more understanding of what I was doing. And so the project really grew organically that way. Meanwhile, like another project, the Speedway project, I started I took a couple of great images out there and I said, this place feels like the exact opposite of what I'm shooting in Lux City. This is a different part of the city. This is a different feeling in this one little place. And so that started with an idea right from the beginning. But then at the same time, that idea morphed. There's a whole part of the project that is that, but then the whole kind of mango story kind of came out as well through that. So that came organically. So it's kind of, there's multiple ways to do it, but yeah, it's just to kind of, it's good to think about it, to look at your work and to think what do you want to create. One project that I think is a great idea for everyone to start with is, tell the story of the area that you live in or spend a lot of time in. It can have people in it. It can have portraits, or it doesn't have to. It could just be the shots of the environment. Try to really capture how you feel about it. Don't just try to capture pretty photographs. Try to capture things that you don't like. Try to capture things, do a mix, like tell the story of what it's like to be there. Here are some photographs some of my favorite ones from the Lux City project. Here it says, talk to me because I'm lonely. Editing consistency. I've talked a lot about this, but here's a photograph. I showed you a couple vape smoking photographs. This one I was trying to get a good vape smoking shot for years, and they were all just random shots of people vape smoking. They weren't great, and finally I got this photograph after like 2 years. Suffering through it and thinking I would never get a good one. Finally, I didn't know what it would look like, but this was the type of image I guess I was hoping for. But I think it's really important to use like collections in Lightroom, or use collections and group your work together, because that's how you form your ideas. You start to see things that you like, you start to put them together. And then often the final idea is way different than the beginning one, but it's a starting place. So I think, working that way is a great thing to do. This is people waiting online in a sample sale or for a sample sale. It's amazing what New Yorkers will wait in line for. Job applications. This is why nobody should ever come to New York and Fifth Avenue in the holiday season. Weird and different images. It's take images that you like and that relate to you, and then work backwards. Don't try to take images for other people that you think they're going to like and fit them in. Start from what you relate to, and don't be afraid of how other people are going to think about those images, or if they're going to quite get them. This is my New York as a bubble image, because New York is a bubble. As much as we think we're a cultural city, and there's a lot, we're our own bubble. Emotion and gesture, as I mentioned, I just want to reiterate, it's so important. So try to notice that emotion with your eyes first as people are walking and things are happening. And embracing spontaneity, which is super important. Just when in doubt, go with your gut. Don't be afraid to take don't not take a photograph because you think it'll be stupid, or if you think it's not going to work. Most likely it'll be stupid, and most likely it's not going to work. But you do enough of that, you're going to get an amazing photograph out of that. So just kind of go for it. This is the photograph where the mother contacted me and has this photograph on her wall. Now, the final part of this thing, I'll just go through this quickly. This is kind of my other project, which, Quiet Brooklyn is kind of what it's, tentatively named. I don't really know what I'm shooting. I've been doing it for a few years and still developing it. But the idea is to shoot the opposite of Lux City. Lux City is, and trying to connect with people through my anxieties and what I'm feeling, what the city's doing to us. And then this Brooklyn project is trying to escape that and trying to search for ideas and people and things that maybe are the opposite, as I try to kind of escape that anxiety feeling, although I don't know if that'll ever happen. Here's one where this had a long, this was done on the Manhattan Bridge, and so it's I basically just talked to him for a long time. We talked about art, we talked about different things. I took a bunch of different photographs, and this is the final photograph of 20 minutes of hanging out with this person. This is actually a portrait. I asked if they could take their portrait, and he kind of got down for a second to pose, and I said I had to say like, no, no, stay exactly how you were. Like I just want like that. That was great, and so it's kind of a mixture between a candid and a portrait. This guy's name is Mort. This guy's a very friendly guy. So like, you know, a situation like this, I was walking around Park Slope at night, you see a guy on the stoop, you know, it can be hard to photograph, you know, something like that. But I just said, hey, how's it going? You know, yeah, love your cat. I'm a photographer. You mind if I take a photograph of the two of you? I think it would be a great photograph. And he was like, sure. Yeah, great. Go for it. This is the first photograph of the Speedway gas station that made me think about doing a project there. And this is a portrait. I love people's front window displays. I think they tell a lot of personality about a neighborhood. We have deer in Brooklyn. I have captured a moose, people carrying a moose head up into an apartment. I've captured a bear in New York. There's a photograph of like faded, like kind of fake flowers, which kind of gives this feel for the area. So I think this, it's kind of this metaphorical image almost. And as I mentioned, photographing where you live is really important. Now forget it all, be instinctive, be spontaneous, and have fun. So that's the presentation. Let me share for a second. I just quickly want to show you all a couple things. I'm going to put a link if you want, just hang out for me for 1 second. I'm going to put a link in the chat. So I have as Vicky mentioned, I have 2 books, The Essentials of Street Photography and the New York Photographer's Travel Guide, which typically I charge for, but it's through this link, you can get them all for free. The trade-off, the rub is that if you sign up for this, you sign up for a mailing list. And so you can get them and then you can unsubscribe from my mailing list if you don't want to be on it. But what I do is I send out emails about once a month with like photographer write-ups or photography related things. You know, I try to do a lot of educational material and stuff like that. So I think you'll like it if you want to stick around. But this is the way you can get them for free. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I just want to show my website for anyone who is curious. Hang here. So this is the bundle page where you can download it. You just put your name and email. This is my website, and I have a few things. One is if anyone's ever interested in coming to New York and doing workshops, I do both private, you know, usually 3-hour workshops in different areas of the city. In 2022, I'll be back to giving the group workshops again. You know, I'm not doing it this year because of the pandemic. But if you go under the books and resources section, under street photo resources, I have a couple pages that I think are really interesting to check out. One is a history of street photographers, and one is the best street photography books. And if you're looking for a camera, I have a camera on. I have a whole write-up on my favorite cameras. But this one is, I think, the most important one, a history of street photographers. What I do is I have a whole write-up of my favorite street photographers split into city, urban, American, suburban, which I think if you're talking about how to do this in kind of suburban areas, looking at these photographers is really important, and foreign. And so you can scroll down here and they have little write-ups about all the photographers. And then if you click on one, let's pick, I love Joel Sternfeld's work. So and click on that, it'll go to a page with a whole write-up on his work, show, you know, his images, talk about his quotes, you know, so it's a great way to get a, you know, an education of the genre with some of the top photographers through that page. And then I love, you know, street photography books. So if you click on there, it goes through a list of my favorite photography books here. And the final thing is, Vicky mentioned the photography community we're a part of. It's called Close to Home. And if anyone's interested in giving it a shot, it's what it is. It's $10 a month, which keeps the lights on for the sites, but it's a month for free for everyone to try it out. If anyone's interested, we're basically looking for people who are, have time to photograph, to try this type of work, who are interested in it, and who are enthusiastic of being part of like this type of community, and commenting on work and things like that. We do a lot of, hangouts and photo book talks and things like that. So you can check that out. It's homephotosalon.com, or you can always send me an email if you have questions about that. So that's everything. And if anybody has any questions or wants to, I'm here for as long as you need.
Yeah, I was also going to say, if any of you have any questions about the close to home, and I'm always open to, you can get a hold of me and I can talk to you about it too. It's an amazing group. We have very diverse photographers from all over the world and just amazing photography. So if you're interested, you can get a hold of me if you can't get a hold of James or whatever.
Yeah, it's about right now we've got about 160 members, and we split them up into groups of 25 to keep like small groups together. It's that whole idea of like having a bigger community, but then a smaller community where people can get to know each other and get to know each other's work over a long period of time. So that's one of the most fun parts.
Yeah, and James, don't listen to this, but don't listen to this.
I'm listening. Yeah.
No, don't.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so the $10 fee is the cheapest fee that I pay for any group that I'm in. And it's one of the most amazing groups that I'm in. So
I'm going to raise the price on you, Vicky.
thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. So does anybody have any questions about further, about street photography, anything?
James, thank you so much for taking the time with us.
Okay. Yeah, my pleasure.
This has really been enjoyable.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed it.
It's really,
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Look forward to exploring your site.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And if anybody has any questions, send me emails, but definitely check out that history of street photographers page, because it's really, that's the next step. Once you learn all this stuff, that's just looking at the work is the most fun thing. So thank you, everybody.
Very good. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
we had a great time. Yeah. So have a great evening. Yep.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Thanks.
Thanks, James.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Yep.
Night, everybody.
Night, Vicky.
Night.
Thank you very
Good
much
night.
for setting this up.
Thank you
Welcome.
for hosting us for this for us.